Hello, this is Angelia, and you're listening to or watching the podcast, Why You Do What You Do. The podcast that talks about human development and psychology to maybe help you figure out a little bit more about why you do what you do. And we've been talking about, what should we call abnormal? You could call it mental illness, mental deficiency. There's lots of names. And we're going to kind of take back up on that. What we call a behavior pattern often depends on what we believe to be its cause. Because, all of them are descriptive. Lunacy comes from the Latin word for moon, luna, which explains why the actions of lunatics were once thought to be inspired by the moon. And of course, now we know that is not necessarily a thing. There are some folks who get more agitated at night and agitated when there is a full moon, but certainly not all people with mental illness problems. And that's just something they thought back in the day. Mental illness, in contrast, implies a disease of the mind, and nervous breakdown suggests a mechanical failure, as if, under too much stress, the person has burnt out, and that could be a thing. I know people who have worked at certain jobs or been in certain situations so long, and they do get burned out. Other terms are primarily descriptive. Psychopathology means dysfunction of behavior. Abnormal simply means not normal. Deviant behavior is behavior deviating from the norm. Disordered means not ordered or not organized in an orderly way. Descriptive terms will be generally preferred to those that imply a theory of causation. Choosing the term abnormal behavior, as limited as that concept is, keeps us from getting tangled up in such terms as craziness, nervous breakdown, mental illness, and the varied terminology sometimes applied to people like Tommy, Arnold, and Elaine. And most providers do prefer mental illness nowadays. So that's probably one you're going to hear me use, because that's the one I was taught coming up through school and by the different doctors that I worked with. So that's the one that most people do use. It is worth emphasizing that this issue is not a trivial one. An individual who is labeled mentally ill, for example, is viewed as having a disease that prevents normal cognition. And that's certainly not the case. That is, normal thinking, and therefore also normal behavior. And again, that's not the case. There are some people with mental illnesses who can get through their life just fine and behave, just fine. So, like I was talking about yesterday about, looks can be deceiving. Some of the friendliest folks out there who everybody thought was just a nice person ends up being a terrible, horrible psychopath, chopping people up and eating them. So, Thus, even when there is reason to suspect that a certain behavior pattern might actually reflect a disease of the mind, as is the case with schizophrenia, we urge caution in applying that label. Because there are schizophrenics who only have very mild symptoms, who can live a normal life, and when things come up, they can check themselves and know, well, that's not really there, that's not right, and, How much of Arnold's behavior is actually due to schizophrenia, and how much has developed as a function of being treated as a schizophrenic? Because, see, the way people treat you is sometimes how you make yourself. Well, they think that I'm this, so this is what I'm going to be. And there are people like that. Carrying the label of a schizophrenia is kind of a license to act peculiarly. No one expects mental patients, or even former mental patients, to behave completely normally. And coming up behind, I'm crazy, and they were saying it because they wanted to be wild and crazy and do what they wanted to do, not behave like they're supposed to do. So that's something that people even will still do is, oh, I'm crazy, she's crazy, and it doesn't mean you actually are, just it's a license to basically be wild, crazy, and do what you want to do. Alternative approaches to psychological disorders. The issue of terminology is related to the larger question of how we interpret psychological disorders. There are many ways of distinguishing abnormal behavior from mere eccentricity, which is what I consider mine, and of determining who among us is suffering from a disorder. We listed the 3 criteria mental health professionals often use in classifying a behavioral pattern as significantly abnormal: showing marked difference from the norms, impairing the person's ability to function, and causing distress. Such an approach might be called the psychological model. In general, there are 4 other categories of models: statistical, biological, disease, and absolute. The statistical model. The statistical approach is based on the fact that most human characteristics, appearance, intelligence, personality traits, are distributed according to what is called the bell curve of standard distribution. This means that most people have similar amounts of each of these traits. The sharp rise in the middle, in other words, most people are average in height, weight, strength, and so on. Of course, some people are shorter, thinner, and weaker than average, and others are taller, heavier, and stronger, because we are each different and unique. We're our own little snowflake. Excuse me. So there are going to be the norm and people that fall outside of that. And, sometimes falling outside of the norm is not a bad thing. For each characteristic, the above average and the below average groups are represented by the 2 ends of the curve. And I know y'all see me do the middle and people fall to the side and left. And if you were looking at the bell curve, it would be higher here and then down, like that. The distribution pattern thus formed resembles a bell. At the center of the distribution curve is the mean, which is the arithmetic average. Math-wise, the very center. A score falling below or above the average deviation from the mean. It turns out that human characteristics tend to cluster in fairly predictable groupings, called standard deviations. Thus, only about 15% of the general population is below average in strength, intelligence, etc., and 15% is above average. Among these individuals, almost 14%, will only be slightly below or above the average. The remainder will fall progressively further from the mean. So, you have that mean average, which is the head of your curve, and then people spread out and go, down from that based on whatever it is you're looking at. The statistical approach to abnormal psychology thus defines a behavior as abnormal if it falls outside the normal range of the distribution curve. This approach is attractive because of its directness and simplicity, but it has the disadvantage of defining any uncommon behavior as abnormal, regardless of its social impact. While this may not be a drawback for such biological characteristics as height, it causes serious interpretive problems for most psychological characteristics. For example, people with an IQ of 145 and above, and those with IQs of 55 and below, are equally abnormal in the statistical sense. In each case, such scores occur in less than 0.13% of the general population. So it doesn't show you what is bad necessarily and what is good. It just shows, what's out of the norm. If you have an IQ of 55, you're down here. out of the norm. And if you have an IQ of 145, you're up here out of the norm. Mine is not that high. Mine's about 10 below that. So, but categorizing both ends of the curve as abnormal raises more questions than it answers. On the whole, although the statistical approach is a way of identifying the frequency of variance behaviors, it offers little help in suggesting how we should regard the people who exhibit them. And that was kind of the problem, back in the 1800s when you had the old, nut houses, as they called them, or the sanitariums. Some people's problem might just be they're a little bit nervous, while somebody else's problem might be they're a killer maniac who wants to rip people apart. So all mental illness is not equal, just like, all statistics are not equal. Another problem with the model is its implication that statistically average is the same as normal. It is not. Most Americans have head colds each year, yet it is strange to think of being sick as normal. In a more relevant area, the initial findings of the Midtown Manhattan study suggested that out of the large random sample of local residents, less than 20% of them could be considered psychologically healthy. Less than 20% of them. The remaining 80% all showed at least some signs of psychopathology, and over 20% had marked impairments. So, out of that sampling, going by that, being mentally ill in Midtown Manhattan is normal. Using the statistical model, the 1/5 who were free of disturbance would be classified as abnormal, and those with problems would be considered normal. So you see, it depends on the group that you're sampling. So that has become kind of a thing here in the good old USA, where normal might have a certain way of believing or thinking, whereas people who fall above average of that are considered to be not normal and not okay and bad and whatever else you want to throw at it. But sometimes normal is not good. Such paradoxes are inherent in the use of the statistical model. So that's the problem with the statistical model. It's going to show you the mean average. And like with the Midtown Manhattan sampling, we all know it's not normal to be mentally ill. Most people are not. But in that particular sampling, the norm was that most of them were. So, again, it depends on what you're looking at. Because different groups of populations are different, and different people behave in different ways. So, what is normal for your group might not be normal for everybody. So, that's something that you have to think about, as society at a whole is larger than any certain group. So, what's good for the goose is not always good for the gander. So, hopefully that give you, a little something to think about. Maybe it helped you figure out a little bit more about why you do what you do. Please like and share this educational program. If you would like to help me out, subscribe to my YouTube channel. If you'd like to help me out even more, go on my Patreon page and become a patron. And since this is an educational program, it is not diagnosed to, it's not designed to diagnose or treat any type of mental illness. So if anything I talked about caused you concern or triggered you in any way, by all means go and talk to your mental health professional. Thanks for watching or listening. That's all for now. Until next time.